What's going on, Hot Take Nation? Before we start this week's show, I want to introduce a company and a personal friend of mine, Steve Moore, who I've coached hockey with. Our kids play hockey. He's been a longtime friend, and he is with Magnum Cementing Services, which has been a top-tier well cementing specialist for over 13 years, as well as providing plug and abandonment services. And boy, have they pumped a lot of cement. They have 50,000 jobs under their belt from every company from startups to majors. They have hundreds of skilled employees across North America, and they are proud to serve the Bakken and the U.S. Rockies region. Of late, their lab team has come up with a chemistry-based solution for the challenging Braden Head cementing issues in the DJ and have been kicking butt in horizontal wells in Powder River. I recommend you check them out. They have pumping equipment that's almost nearly all brand new, state-of-the-art, assembled and manufactured in-house, and most importantly, since entering the U.S. market in mid-2019, they have 0 man-hours lost to safety incidences. You know how I feel about safety. As I mentioned, they are a specialist in cementing services. They've added a new product line called Magnum Infrastructure, which does cement soil stabilization work. If you haven't heard of soil stabilization, it involves taking a cement slurry, mixing it in the soil for the purpose of constructing a more robust pad, road, or other surface. You can use it with feedlots, construction sites, foundations for roads and highways, lease roads, and well pads. Brand new business, but they've already performed lots of awesome work, and I suggest you check them out. The way you can get in front of my friend Steve Moore, you can call him 310-701-3113, or you can check them out at magnumcement.com or magnuminfrastructure.com. Steve and Magnum, appreciate your sponsorship. Excited about this week's show. On with the show. What is going on, Hot Take Nation? It is David Ramsden-Wood here for another episode of Hot Take of the Day podcast, and it is 2021, which is unbelievable because coronavirus has been solved. I'm not sure if you know, but the world is better. The economy is open. New Year's resolutions took off. Everyone has lost weight. No one is drinking. And it is the single greatest time to be alive. I am very fortunate to be joined by my guest today, which is Bresee Carlson. Bresee, first of all, before I get into a big intro, welcome to the show. How are you? How was your New Year's?
My New Year's was fantastic. I mean, 2020 set the bar pretty low. So I think if I spent the actual New Year in a dumpster fire, it would have been appropriate and or an upgrade. But the New Year's has been great, right? We're how many days in? 6?
It's six today. It's 6 today, which is why I'm actually having you on the show. So to catch listeners up, because this show, we tape and then we release. Yesterday, for context, was the Georgia Senate runoffs. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about frac bans. We're going to talk about federal issues. We're going to talk about legalities. We're going to talk about law. We're going to talk about title issues. But that kicks me off because the last time we had you on the show was April 20th. I don't know if you remember that. Probably not. But so
was that on or around the time that my partner and I were chatting about, hey, oil hit $1. Hey, oil hit -10. Hey, oil hit -460. Wait, this isn't a thing.
Yeah. So factually, we filmed the first time you were on the show the day after oil hit -37 a barrel. And I mean, I think relatively to the context, I look back on the shows from early 2020 and I had a lot of enthusiasm January, February. I had a little bit of panic in March. By April, it was full zero fucks given. And I was absolutely mortified with the state of the world. And it happened at the show we filmed where we talked about title and how you can preserve your leases given that oil was low. We didn't know it was going to be -37 a barrel. But so this is, in a way, it's an anniversary show that you're coming back on because, setting the stage, yesterday there was a runoff in Georgia, which if you've been living under a rock all of 2020, first of all, please invite me. I would like to come over. But secondly,
It's called a bunker, not a rock.
It's a bunker. I think our friend Jack Hamlin has like a mountain retreat now. He's just pulled off the grid, right? So he's somewhere in the mountains, like on propane and going away. But so in Georgia, the rule is if you did not win 50% of the vote during the election November 3rd, flash forward January 5th, which is the first Tuesday of the year, I presume, is when they do the runoff, and only the top two candidates hit it. And so I have been deeply concerned going back to November 3rd when the Republicans had gained seats in the House and Biden had won, and the Senate seemed to be in the Republicans' control, and the markets went crazy because, man, nothing is better than a split government. Nothing is better. But I was like, I feel like the market is underappreciating what's going on in Georgia, because if the Democrats have like 45 days to focus $1 billion there, aren't they going to win? And sure enough, yesterday it appears, at least as of recording today, that both seats in the Senate in Georgia went to, boom, the Democrats. Which then now brings us to the Bresee Carlson expertise. You are a lawyer by trade. Maybe just for the guests who don't know you, which would be shocking, but for those who don't know you, give a little intro to your background and what you're working on and what your expertise is.
So lawyers are experts at Googling things they don't actually know currently. We're normal human beings, contrary to popular belief. Sure, we may have a higher billable hour than a janitor, but definitely not a plumber. If anybody has had their toilet break, let me assure you right now, I pay plumbers more than I make. And a lawyer, you may be like, yes, I have that ticket and that court date. I should call her, but also $500 is a lot. Nah, I'm just going to give it a go. When your toilet's overflowing, a plumber, way more valuable than a lawyer.
Facts.
So we use the term expert loosely throughout. And I mean, politics is fascinating. I was a political science major, double major. I don't even know. College, it was like 400 years ago, 300 years ago.
But was your GPA higher than 3.6?
The
Twitter crowd wants to know, was your GPA higher than 3.6? Because I apparently have a threshold.
Yes, in undergrad it was. It was actually, I think it was a 3.6. I think.
Dude, you keep it on your wall. For those who watch on YouTube, you can see, oh, we get all the degrees. I like this.
Oh, look at that. And it says cum laude, which I think means with honors, which I think means really smart. I don't know if that's actually indicative of my smarts. I graduated in 2.5 years, though, what most people do in like 5, 6, yourself included.
6 years for me.
Yeah, so I don't know if the cum laude is as rewarding as just knowing I had less debt and was younger than everybody else when I entered the competitive market. But neither here nor there. We won't talk about my law school GPA. Just because we don't have time. We're going to run out of time. And so, yeah, anyway, where are we going with that?
So we were talking about loose experts. So you were comparing yourself to a janitor. You clarified that you had a high GPA and you finished quickly. So we can assume you're smart. Okay.
Know enough to be dangerous, but politics is really fascinating because there is this sky is falling narrative that's been going on for the last probably decade, if we're being honest, but more so magnified in 2020, and especially for people who are in oil. And I'm just not super sure I buy into that narrative. Do I think it has value? Absolutely. Do we need to check ourselves at the door and be conservative? 100%. Mindfulness, probably more than panic, would be my litmus of how we should navigate point forward. But it is really, really fascinating when you look at the runoffs in Georgia. Do I think that one seat is going to have a huge impact? Personally, no.
2 seats.
But one's already been called.
One's been called,
right?
but the other one's going to be called. I mean, let's be honest.
Don't be a pessimist.
I'm not being a pessimist. I'm just saying, so hypothetically, let's just assume for the purposes of this conversation, the Democrats have now effectively won control of the Senate for a lot of reasons, which we can talk about. But specifically, it's because Kamala, the vice president, will have the deciding vote, and assuming everyone splits on 50-50, therefore, controlling the Congress, controlling the presidency, and controlling the Senate means that for at least the next 2 years, the Democrats can do whatever they want. And going into, so that's what we're going to talk about. Going into November, the big concern for an oil and gas community was banning fracking. And you and I have had a chat mid probably 2020 about this, where I was concerned. And you said the following around banning fracking using the experience of Obama. So go.
That's not an actual thing.
You can't ban fracking. Can Joe Biden ban fracking? Which we've talked about the alternatives, burning dung. We've talked about the cost being really cold in Aspen. We've talked about the number of wells in the United States that require fracking to produce natural gas, and that is 67%, and 100% of wells that are oil producing require fracking in the United States, correct? So if you need oil and gas, you need fracking. So the question on everyone's mind is, can Joe Biden, as president of the United States, with the Senate on his side, with the Congress on his side, can he ban fracking on federal lands?
No. In my opinion, one.
I like that. That was a very lawyerly caveat.
Well, that's what lawyers love. We love the asterisk, right? That's our favorite thing.
In my opinion, no, but it should probably be litigated for like $100 million.
By the way, you owe me $500 an hour, and I guarantee you nothing.
Oh, the key is to get legal advice while on a podcast, because then I think it's free, but I mean, maybe I get a bill. I'm not sure.
And it also comes with no guarantees and 12 asterisks.
Perfect.
No, I don't think Joe Biden can. I mean, this is my position. One, I think the misnomer of fracking leads to this hysteria of a fracking ban. His mechanism to do so is extremely limited. You look at the Obama era regulations, you have two mechanisms to really regulate fracking from
as a country or as a president?
The president doesn't do shit. Let's be honest. And God bless. I
can't believe you. I'm so offended. No, I'm not actually.
You are going to bleep this out, right?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Well, yeah, we don't swear on this podcast.
Here's the thing about the president. What are the tools in his belt? It's an executive order. Legally, do you know what an executive order means?
No, I don't. That's why I'm asking you. You're the lawyer. I'm just an engineer.
Lawyers don't know what it means either. It doesn't mean anything. It has no actual legal teeth. So a president can issue an executive order, and it's basically akin to a policy. I mean, that's the same as your parents saying, go brush your teeth because I told you so.
So is that the same with the eviction moratorium? Because President Trump, through the CDC, had an executive order to ban evictions until whatever, December 31st or whenever it was. And what you're saying is it didn't really have teeth, which is interesting because I know landowner friends, everyone was very confused about what it actually meant and no one could figure it out. So
the interesting thing about that, right? So they banned evictions on mortgages that were backed by federal loans. So the idea being you can't, like, the feds aren't going to top down, bottom up. We're not going to evict you. You don't evict them. We have control over this. This is the same with a fracking ban. The only thing Joe Biden actually has any sort of purview over at all would be federal minerals, which make up
20%, 30%. Is that fair?
No, I think the actual statistic would be closer to like half if you're including onshore and offshore.
Okay.
But if you're just including onshore, you're talking the biggest states are Wyoming,
New Mexico,
35%, Colorado,
Colorado.
25 to 30%, New Mexico, 25 to 30%, North Dakota, 20 to 30.
Yeah.
And of course, when you really get, and this is where my wheelhouse comes into play, I am I'm a specific view, operator specific view of land use law. So while there are lawyers who are significantly more educated and versed in federal issues than I am when it comes to nuanced federal issues, I am aware of federal issues insofar as they concern the day-to-day operation of drilling and spacing units I've encountered for my own clients. And most of my clients operate in federally dominated areas, but that is to say, I'm familiar with sage grouse to the extent I've encountered sage grouse. Do I know everything about sage grouse litigation that's pending in every state that has to do with the little chicken with the feathers and the thing? No. And this is what's wild about government, right? The answer is always sure for now.
As in like Biden could do an executive order on fracking that for now today would feel very burdensome, but at the end of the day really isn't.
He can't do, well, so what would an executive order on fracking look like? It has to be rationally related to something he has the right to regulate, which is public health, safety, welfare. So that's going to fall under like EPA, air quality. So it's going to be like Obama tried to regulate emissions, or there has to be a trigger for us to regulate. His real only avenue, I think, through an executive order is going to be through some sort of environmental study. We either think it pollutes ground table or water table, air. Those are the only two real avenues that I think have enough teeth to survive.
Well, and as we talked about, the water table is kind of, like there's the video in Gasland or whatever that was like lighting their water on fire. And again, I mean, of course there's going to be exceptions, and clearly under the coronavirus world we live in 2020, we only govern to the exception. But like for the most part with casing, which is the thing that matters most, we don't really light groundwater on fire with our wells. And so one would say that from a groundwater perspective, that argument is very weak. Would you agree?
But here's what they can do. They can say there is tenuous data that supports the inference that this practice contaminates groundwater. And we need to do a study on it.
Right.
So everybody stop. Right. Nobody move.
Now, that would be federal and state and fee?
No.
Just federal.
Just federal. Which is really interesting because you look at a operator's portfolio and the exposure is definitely disproportionate from operator to operator. And federal lands, the BLM, it's really interesting when you look at it in the light of Colorado, but the BLM, as it stands today, has a mandate that it is supposed to balance and manage development of all United States assets, mineral lands, blah, blah, blah. It's a balancing test. What we've seen in Colorado has been the conversion of a balancing test to a environment first hurdle. That has not happened on federal lands. So when everybody says Joe Biden,
but it couldn't it? I mean, to your point, I mean, you're making a parallel to the state, and I find it interesting. We haven't chatted about this probably. I mean, I did a talk for DAPL in January of 2020. So a lot has evolved since then. But one of the things I talked about at that talk was PDC, because as a relative value proposition at $55, they made a lot of sense. But since January of last year, we've seen a massive change in the Colorado's, like the way it's legislated by Polis, by the COGCC, by the state, by like they've implemented all these incredibly onerous rules, and yet PDC stock is basically today the same as it was a year ago. And I look at the operating environment in Colorado and I say, like, this is an abomination. And when I think about Biden, I get very afraid that what happened in Colorado he can do. Now maybe it's not fracking, but it's like they administrate this and AOC becomes the head of, you know, like cultural awareness, blackness relative to drilling or fracking, or I don't even know. They're going to make it up. Bresee.
Okay, we will not digress down the environmental racism path, but I will say I am fascinated by this topic because NIMBY, as I mentioned, is a very, very valid legal premise. And
valid in
not
what
in
way?
my backyard. Not in my backyard.
No, I know that, but like, how is that valid? Like, that's
well,
like,
it is valid. I mean, there's so many
your
things.
house is cheaper because it's in your backyard. That's like
no,
literally
but okay,
the
but
definition.
you're assuming that you consume the nuisance, which we do consume the nuisance with respect to oil and gas. But your neighbor's dog shit, you don't consume that nuisance. So NIMBY was this legal premise that was built on nuisance law of things that we were not dependent on. We were saying, I don't want this in my yard because I don't need you. Like,
I don't want my neighbors to have a
here.
loud party with music. That's a nuisance.
Because I'm not invited. But when you're talking about something that we are all reliant on, NIMBY is just ignorant. Because if you need it, you might as well put it in your backyard.
Right.
Fact, in my humble opinion.
Now you had said something, and one of my favorite people that I had went to a DAPL talk on was Doug Sandridge. And I think that you had come up with a concept that was like, if people knew how many windmills their life required, and so like for you to have your lifestyle, you like literally need to drag 2 windmills, half a windmill, whatever the number is, like down the street. That's a very big nuisance, and no one would want that windmill in their backyard. But to your point, it's not a valid legal premise because we all are happy that we have heat and we have light and we have energy and our internet requires it. And it's this trade-off conversation.
Well, and it's a valid legal premise. If you have the voter capacity to say, we have zoning, we have counties, we have municipalities, and we have commissions, and we can vote this out of our state, we can vote this out of our county, I can vote this out of my backyard, fine. But to do so is stupid, unless you are pairing that with a like reduction in consumption or replacing it with an alternative fuel.
But so nobody does. I mean, and that's therein lies the issue.
Nobody does that.
So this is, I mean, this is the crux of the issue where I've had lots of guests, as you know. I've had Chris Wright on the show. I've had Ryan Zorn on the show. We chatted about this a little bit, but honestly, oil was like negative $37 a barrel, and we were trying to save leases for people at the time. But it seems to me that like the coronavirus stimulus package, which when I think about the conversion of the Senate to being predominantly, or at least 50-50 Democrat, I think they're going to print money. And when I think about them printing money, they're not printing money at the expense of something else. It's not like they're saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. We realize that families are very, very poor, so we're going to give them money. And in exchange, we're going to shut down federal services to such and such to save the same amount of money. We're going to shut down the military for 4 months because we spend $800 billion a year on the military, and 4 months is 250. We're giving people 250 billion in cash. We think that they need the cash more than they need the military. So there you go. There's your answer. There's your trade-off. That's never done.
So I refrain from, or I resist doomsday perspectives.
But is
From
that
an
a doomsday?
energy,
Is that a doomsday perspective? It costs $4 trillion to run our country a year, of which roughly
no,
25% is for the military. The federal government has a very limited mandate. And now we're just sending money to people. Like, that's not
no,
doomsday. That's what
I
we're
don't think
doing.
I don't think it's a doomsday perspective as you are issuing it. I think it is a critical perspective as intended. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it is perceived by many as a doomsday perspective. I do hear the response, which I do respect in certain regards, especially from a personal standpoint, that, okay, we've printed money and we believe in American ingenuity to build and to thrive and to repay said monies. Do I think that is necessarily a healthy outlook? Ask everybody in the bankruptcy court right now. Probably not. And I think 9 out of 10 people who think I'm going to repay said monies never repay said monies, and 10% repay said monies and thrive. So I don't take the printing of cash as the sinking of the ship. And I resist the narrative that it's our ultimate demise, because no matter what, it's already happened. So this is where we are today. And our options are roll up sleeves or sink. And personally, my kids are on this ship, and my kids aren't sinking until I'm good and dead first. So I do believe in our ability to thrive. But I do think the first step in doing so is honestly acknowledging the debt that we've created, the role that it has, and what we need to do to fix it. I mean, perfect example, take renewables. So I was reading an article by, I don't know, insert human here, and I'll post it on your notes or whatnot. Swedish, Swish, European, someone. And he was celebrating. This is great. We've printed so much money and it's all tied to infrastructure stimulus. This is wonderful. This is the year of new renewables. Like, this is so great. True, probably. Renewables are going to have a great year. But all I could come back to is, that's wonderful. We are printing money to, at best, replace what we already have.
Which is an excellent point. I mean, we're basically tearing down a house that exists to build a new house that arguably is slightly more efficient, but it certainly is going to cost a lot of dollars to do it.
And
it's a great point.
When we discovered oil, and by we, I mean some capitalist wildcatters.
And the whales were happy. I saw a comic the other day that, like, because they used to use whale blubber for lantern oil. And so as soon as they found that light oils could be used in the lanterns in the late 1800s, the whales were rejoicing, because no longer did we have to use whale blubber. We had resource from the earth. It was amazing.
Well, it was amazing. And this is the thing about oil. I mean, I was musing on the treadmill. That's where I really do my best work in thinking. And by best work, I mean totally useless. But like, just regurgitate my thoughts over and over. And I don't take it the wrong way. I'm totally in love with fossil fuels. Like, I think they are the sexiest, greatest thing on the face of the planet. And I was asking myself, like, why are you obsessed with oil? Like, why do you love oil? And the truth of the matter is, oil was a game changer. It propelled human life into a totally different space. And the ROI was so exponential, we can't even look back and quantify it. It's the difference between the 1918 flu and this pandemic, to borrow somebody's terminology,
Ooh,
that we've had
controversial.
this year. I mean, the pictures that I saw on LinkedIn of cots and bodies and blah, blah, blah in March, and that was what we based our whole premise of fear on, was bodies in the streets. I don't know of anywhere in America that we've seen bodies in the streets. In 1918, you bet your ass there was bodies in the streets. The reason there were bodies in the streets is because we have ventilators. We have grids to support them. We have vaccinations, miraculous, political or otherwise, that can be produced with fossil fuels in 9 months. Mind blown.
Yeah, think about the computer energy that went into the research and the data and the cloud. It's one of the reasons I really think that like Netflix and Google and Microsoft and Apple are so green, is because their dirty little secret is the amount of energy they consume to provide us with the access to streaming movies, all the data, all the clouds, all the time. In Mark Mills' Digital Cathedral, he talks about the digital footprint and the carbon footprint of building energy for us to have this every day.
Did you see the release? It's Google, right? That's no longer going to write algorithms for oil and gas companies?
I did, yes. But then also, ironically, Google just had a partnership with Saudi Aramco to build an energy grid. But again, like, where does Saudi Aramco's money come from? Oil. And so it's like this North Face, and I had Adam Anderson on the show, and the fact that North Face, like, first of all, they own a brand through VF, their parent company. They own a brand which creates fire retardant equipment, which uses oil products to make, and then they sell them exclusively to oil and gas people. But they don't want to use oil and gas products, or they don't want to sell their jackets from North Face to oil and gas companies, even though oil and gas products are in their jackets themselves. Like, the intellectual inconsistency, and just like, that people aren't thinking about the next thing. And it's not to say people are stupid. It's not to say people are C students, but people are not thinking about where their food comes from, where their energy comes from, and the trade-offs that they make every single day by turning on their computer. And it's shocking to me.
So here's the interesting piece. From a regulatory, the ship is sinking standpoint, I think, and don't totally quote me, but the last I read, like, the average length of time to complete a administrative rulemaking. So there's a difference between policy and law, right? And that's, the door is locked and you can't leave, and mom just said you really shouldn't, it's not advised, right? And the amount of time it takes to actually pass legislation or enact administrative proceeding, rulemaking, which both have the force of law, is significantly longer than it takes to issue policy. And Trump issued a bunch of policy, which operators relied on, and in large part to their detriment. I mean, we have lots of contested lease sales in flux right now, millions worth of capital tied up in suspended leases in multiple Western states, and DSUs that now are rendered kind of stranded until these issues are settled. And that is one thing you open yourself up to when you have federal lands in your repertoire. But at the end of the day, I feel like everything needs to be looked at from a risk reward standpoint, conservatively, and risks should be respected, understood, and acknowledged, but then accepted and navigated accordingly. So would I say that because we have this huge renewable push, oil and gas should be avoided at all costs? Absolutely not. I think you'd be an idiot to think that we can continue down the path of lifestyle to which we've become accustomed without oil and gas. Should you, because we have a Biden administration, avoid having federal minerals in your portfolio? Absolutely not. They have great lease terms in large parts. They're very predictable. There's plenty of upsides to federal minerals. But the power, and it's the same with the savings clauses that we discussed earlier this year, at an awkwardly appropriate time. The power really comes from knowing your exposure. And that is really fascinating in light of OPEC.
So explain that. So say how are you thinking about savings in light of OPEC?
I'm not thinking about savings in light of OPEC. So we discussed savings clauses.
Oh, the savings of leases. Forgive me. I whenever I hear the word savings, I think about people's savings, and then I go straight to the financial. You mean saving of leases?
It's risk management, right? And really, I think when you look at savings clauses, if you're relying on a savings clause, you're already past risk management. You're in conflict.
Right. You're in crisis management.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with federal minerals, I think a lot of people talk about a Biden administration and they approach it as if it's crisis management. Do I think it's crisis management? No. No presidential administration has been able to do that much that it's significantly impacted industry in the history of ever. You look at Obama.
all of his desires, and so yeah, you look at Obama, all of his desires to shut down fossil fuels, no one's ever been able to do it.
You're going to frustrate purpose, and you're going to strand marginal assets, and you're going to make investment riskier, for sure. But for the right operator with the right asset, that risk is worth navigating. And for the right operator with the right understanding of that risk, if you know going into your DSU exactly what your risks are with all of your federal leases, and you have backup locations that may not be from a engineering standpoint or evaluation standpoint your number 1, 2, and 3, but they are your 4, 5, and 6, and you know, hey, these 6 things can hit the wall before I have this location producing, and I have my rig that can go here in case of emergency, you're fine. It's just depth of planning.
Are you saying our industry comes down to planning and that historically we haven't done a great job? Did I throw words in your mouth on that?
Well, I wouldn't say that our industry does a poor job of planning. Because I know a lot of people who have a lot of plans. And even one of my first jobs was before I even knew what our industry did. I planned tidal for the Powder River Basin and was always 8 months ahead of my rig. I didn't know what my rig was. I didn't know what my rig was doing, but I knew I was 8 months ahead of it. What I would say we do a historically poor job of is being acutely aware of our exposure.
So can I paraphrase? So using OPEC as an example, I'm going to dumb this down because I like I said, I need things in very small pieces. So if we use OPEC, we don't appreciate the role that OPEC is playing in the broader market. And so we're not aware of all the ramifications. We're very narrow in our view. And so we're not taking a wholesome risk management approach to all of the externalities that could impact our business. I think I might have made that more complicated. It's unclear.
You should be a lawyer.
No, I don't. I think I'd be horrible. I think I would be in contempt of court every time I went to the judge.
Yeah,
So
no, you would. Yeah, you're already there with LinkedIn and everywhere else. So why wouldn't you be in contempt of court? No, I mean, so I guess the OPEC thing I only raise, of course, in response to your post recently with respect to the cuts. And I think one of the things I took to heart in March was the exposure of US shale to OPEC decision making.
absolutely.
And yeah, and when you look at, I mean, what was it? I think it was actually like a Saturday or whatever.
Then
And I think
The
it was
Saudis
actually,
in March, yeah.
yeah, and I think it was you that called me and you were like, the world's on fire and everybody's gonna die. And it's like, I don't understand the question. I'm canning salsa. But I do think that that should have been a very eye-opening moment for us. And I think we have scaled back to a point that we actually have the opportunity to embrace our vulnerabilities and navigate point forward mindfully in a way that insulates us in the event that, oh, I don't know, let's say OPEC's most recent cuts are not authentic in some sort of respect. And 2 quarters from now, they're planning on us having ramped up production, discarded our mindfulness of debt, and being more and more vulnerable to $30 oil.
See, it's funny that you say that, because I read the release as well, and I bias to the same implication that you are. And I remember March very well, and there were a lot of people who going into March were saying there's too much oil in the world. And I'm like, yeah, but OPEC has, since 2014, they've never really broken apart other than, I mean, that one time, but let's not worry about that one time because it's been so good ever since. And then they hit us over the head. And it is amazing that now, less than 10 months later, everyone is ignoring the fact that when OPEC broke, oil went from 52 to negative 37 over the course of 42 days. And I personally am extraordinarily gun shy and terrified that if I were OPEC and the US producers are on the mat like they are, there is no way I'm giving them a gift. Like, this is like the Trojan horse of all Trojan horses. And everyone has read that. Everyone saw Brad Pitt in his good-looking form in the movie Troy, where they wheel that thing in and then everybody dies. That, I think, I agree with you. That seems like what's what he's doing.
And I'm the last person to be a conspiracy theorist. I mean, I call my mom, and every time I call my mom, I'm like, Jesus Christ, Dad, hide the tinfoil. Like, she's lost her mind. So I don't mean to be that person. But I do think we need to be prepared for that. And I think we've had this amazing gut check. And really, with any gut check comes an opportunity to restructure. And never will I ever use the term build back better. But what I will do is say mindful reconstruction is a thing. And we know who our enemies are. Our enemies are currently our government and our federal government to the extent it impacts federal assets, and our state governments to the effect that they regulate fee lands within our state and permitting. And we need to know our foes. We need to know our foes inside and out, and we need to plan our locations accordingly. And we need to plan our production in a way that reduces our exposure to everything else.
So it's interesting that when you talk about our foes, you don't include China, you don't include Russia, you don't include Saudi Arabia, which is, if I were to say the single biggest mistake that our industry made was that, and I wrote a post about this in February, every USCP at year end 2019 was coming out in February saying, we're growing oil 10%, we're growing oil 15%, we're growing gas 10%. And the world didn't need it because, as you said, we're focused on our federal government, we're focused on our state governments, and we are focused on Greenpeace and activists and etc. But we're not thinking about our product in the context of a global commodity. And it is Saudi who in 2014 and again in 2020 were the ones that carried the stick. And although we got a carrot with their million barrel a day cut, one must ask themselves, why did they do that? And where is the stick? So it's interesting when you think about foes, you don't include the international folks.
So that's really interesting because, and again, logic-based, not a numbers person, fully not an engineer, 100% property attorney. But I do usually get that A plus B equals C or doesn't. And what I recall from March, and when everybody was in hysterics about what is Russia going to do and what is OPEC going to do and what is the US going to do, what it really all boiled down to is what price point do we need in our commodity to make our production profitable. And the exposure as between the Saudis, the Russians, and the US was all AFE based. And you look at US producers, and I've seen across my desk a myriad of AFEs, neighboring EFEs with very different expenditures. And I think for me, the take home there is, I'm not worried about China, because if we actually just look at what we can control, which is us, our own lands, our own exposures, our own assets, and we ask ourselves, how do we do this better than they're doing that? And we need to do that at a commodity price tolerance that makes us not vulnerable to external forces. Insert force here: China, Russia, demand, supply, OPEC, you name it. If you are efficiently producing your barrels, which I know is so much easier said than done, does it matter what the stimulus is as much? I would argue no. Is that a very idyllic statement? 100%. Is it easier said than done? 100%. But I do think we are at this position where we can look at incoming administrations, renewables, all of these circumstantial kind of forces. And we can either treat them as an adversary that we're going to disregard, and we can
like
battle
Uber
uphill.
disregarded taxi cabs.
Yes, we can battle uphill. We can say, forget it. We don't forget the administration. We're going to keep doing exactly what we've done. We're going to fight the man. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. Or we can say, you know what? Okay, we get it. We have an administration that is going to look more at this than that. And I've seen clients produce wonderfully creative drilling plans that have mitigated surface impacts in sensitive areas. And they have enlarged DSUs that most people would drill 8 wells, because you can permit 8 laterals in them. Great, that's wonderful. Why not have 8 when you can have 2? But they say, forget it. We have 2 and we're going to put them cattywampus from this weird corner because there's already a surface location there, and you know those birds are diddling over there. So let's let them diddle, and we're going to drill here. And
are you referring to the sage grouse and their leks? Yeah, I like your phrase better than the government's phrase. I think we should.
Who am I to judge? You do you. And so there are ways to navigate around everything that's happening, but those same clients are the ones that tell me, we're going to talk about your billable hours, and they are my conservative clients across the board. And while there's days that I like throw the sand in the wind and curse the name, they're going to survive. And it's a beautiful thing. So I think that all of the doomsday, understanding how the rules work, understanding that policy isn't law. And when you rely on policy as opposed to law, you're exposing yourself to risk. And that's what a lot of people did under the Trump administration, because he did change a lot of things hastily, which is all policy. And a lot of people that relied on those policies in 2017, 2018, 2019, their leases are either suspended, invalidated, held up somehow. And then just knowing how to navigate, knowing how to identify in your assets how much risk you're exposed to, and knowing that you need to have an alternative that's economically viable, then maybe you can hide the panic button and stop with the.
So last question for you then. Do you think that coming out of 2020, because it is both on the day that oil hit the lowest ever and the day that oil has hit, in relative context, the highest in a year, there's been a lot of learnings in 2020, I think, personally, professionally, everywhere. Do you feel as though our industry has learned from the past and will do, as you've very, I think, appropriately laid out, both from a lawyer perspective, but just from someone who loves this industry, a risk mitigating focus? Do you feel like our industry is better positioned to mitigate risk today and that they truly understand it? Or do you believe that they're just going to go back to the way it was January 2020 and batten down the hatches, here we come? Curious your take personally. Don't talk about your clients, obviously.
I think, to quote you, maybe, we're going to see a little from column A and a little from column B. And it's going to be the difference between survival and not survival. And maybe some of those from column B that shouldn't have survived will, based just on luck only. But no, I think this last year has been the worst ever for so many reasons. But if you objectively step back, it is a psychological experiment like none other. It's a learning opportunity like none other. And those that want to survive and learn are going to thrive. And those that don't, won't. I mean, we're either going to repeat our mistakes or not. And it's going to be the difference between, I don't know, whatever amoeba didn't turn into a human because it refused to evolve. And, you know, that like one monkey that was super smart and then all of a sudden looked like me.
I like that perspective. I like that. No, I do. I think that the future is ours to make, and we can make choices based on what we've learned. And if anything we've learned, government can't actually successfully screw things up, because I believe it was you. I can't remember, it must have been at a DAPL event, but wasn't it Hickenlooper who first passed the first setback rule of like 500 feet in our industry? It was like the tightest in the country, and our industry went crazy, but then we solved it. And now we're facing 2,000 foot setbacks, and we're kind of like, well, I mean, we're going to be fine. So we either adapt and survive, or we go out in a blaze of glory, a bankruptcy, and then management bonuses and start again.
But at the end of the day, we have a society and a lifestyle and a global population. And this is where Doug Sandridge's data is unbelievable. And for anyone who listens to this that wants to watch his recorded presentation, I have it. I'll give it to you. We can post the link. I mean, he does an amazing job of making very complex data very accessible.
Yeah, especially climate change. I mean, everything, but climate change has been one of his focuses. I've certainly seen some of his talks, and I'm going to have him on to do a series here in 2021. I agree with you totally. So, sorry, carry on.
He's amazing. I mean, he's fantastic. And in the regard of, we don't have the ability to replace what we have with technology that exists today. And in my opinion, that is an undisputable fact. So to say otherwise is ignorant. My love affair with oil aside, that's a fact. If you showed me a windmill that produced more BTUs than a gas well, I would probably be in love with that too. And I'd be like, forget you, oil. You're my college boyfriend. I've got a new man. Like, I get it. But that's just not the case. There is no way that we can replace what we have with what we're doing. It's illogical. And until we really accept those facts and really wrestle with how to resolve the global demand, it's just not about what Sacramento wants or San Jose wants. That's fine that they are fine not cooking on gas, but the millions of people that cook on dung, we'll politely call it, they want to cook on electric. And they can't do that without oil and gas. Like the things we take for granted, there are millions of human beings that would scoop what we have up and utilize it. So this cheap energy that we're producing, I don't see our domestic regulations reducing global demand. I see people in other countries laughing at us like, haha, that's so funny. They want to pay 60% more for that. That's great. We should buy what they're making. And whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. Clearly, I'm not an expert. I'm just a lawyer. But
I love it. I think it's a healthy. I think it's a very healthy perspective. It's very hard to destroy what we have, and we've totally taken what we have for granted. And there are billions of people around the world that would give literally their firstborn child to have the lifestyle that we do, and it is afforded by oil and gas. So
wait, can we do that one thing where you asked that question?
Oh yes, I can. I didn't have that question when we first did that. That is right. I would love to know, what would you tell 22-year-old Bresee, based on everything that you've learned in the last however many years it's been, since I'll use my wokeness to not comment on age, because apparently that's not a thing. You're not allowed to talk about age or gender or race or anything anymore. But if you could go talk to yourself at 22 and give that 22-year-old advice based on what you know today to make your life better, what advice would you give?
So I'm going to rephrase to my professional younger self. My 22-year-old self, I would probably say something like, don't be an idiot, love you, mean it. But my professional younger self, and I think I've done a very poor job of this in this podcast in particular, but I think I do a better job in our private conversations. But I really hope I would tell myself to shut up and listen. And then when you want to talk, still shut up some more. And then think about what you heard. And then speak after you're done listening and thinking about your listening. Because it's amazing what you hear when you don't talk. And in a space like today, where we have so many opinions and polar opinions, and positions based on emotional responses, we fire off so quickly. And actually, I think there is psychological research that shows the brain processes emotion faster than it processes logic. And so really, your most well-reasoned response is going to be the one that takes you the most time. And that would be the one that I think our society as a whole, myself as an individual, and probably every 20-year-old on the face of the planet in a frat house somewhere would learn a lot from maybe trying 1 or 2 times between now and 30 something.
I like it. That is great advice. Listen more, and when you feel like you should talk, continue to think about listening. I love it. Well, Bresee, as always, I always enjoy your perspectives. I enjoy what you do on LinkedIn. I am very pleased with your advocacy through Energy Strong, and it was a great decision by that organization to pick you up. And so appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm sure we'll chat at some point forward.
Excellent. Well, until next time, thank you for joining. Always subscribe on our YouTube channel, to our Apple, our Spotify, to our email newsletter, where we get to cover all forms of topic, including what OPEC did and who and what buyer wants to spend time with your loved one. Until next time, be safe, be good, have a great day, and bye for now.